I think she's very nice, but she's very low IQ, and we really don't need low IQ. Between her and Crockett, we're gonna give them both an IQ test to see who comes out best. I already took mine, an official test at Walter Reed Medical Center, and I aced it. Got every single question right. Now it's their turn. He always pushes this narrative, always feeds into this idea, that women of color are somehow low IQ. Let me be very clear, I have a lot more education than he does. That's just the truth. My degrees, I earned them. My father didn't have to make a phone call to get me into anything, because that was never an option. So let's stop pretending I'm somehow lesser. What I do know is this: no sir, you're not getting a third term. That's not happening. The Supreme Court is gonna have to find their big boy and big girl panties and do what's right. The Constitution is crystal clear. And honestly, you never should have had one term. If I'm being perfectly real, you were never qualified to be president. Not once, and absolutely not twice. Your incompetence is showing. Even your own people see it. Yes, my girl Marjorie Taylor Greene is disappointed in you too. Listen, you are a loser, and sadly, the rest of us are being dragged down by your loser ways. For years, Donald Trump did everything he could to make people fear us. His narrow worldview made him feel threatened by the existence of two hardworking, highly educated, successful people who just happen to be black. I want to know, who's gonna tell him? Who's gonna tell him the job he's fighting for might just be one of those black jobs he likes to mock? When Trump tried to dominate the conversation, Jasmine Crockett and Michelle Obama didn't raise their voices, they raised the standard. And in one unforgettable moment, they redefined what leadership really means. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the nation through the screen that night. Cameras flashed, the audience murmured, and the bright stage lights of Atlanta's Civic Center gave everything a surreal glow. It was supposed to be a calm evening, a televised town hall on women's leadership, hosted by CNN's Rachel Mitchell. But the moment Jasmine Crockett and former First Lady Michelle Obama walked on stage, something in the air shifted. They weren't there for drama. They were there for truth. But as millions would soon see, truth often arrives wrapped in confrontation. Rachel opened the night with her usual poised professionalism, welcoming both women to the panel. Tonight, we talk about leadership, responsibility, and the future of women in America, she said. The crowd applauded politely. Jasmine smiled, hands folded neatly. Michelle leaned back slightly, calm, attentive, almost expectant, then Rachel's earpiece crackled. She paused, glanced at the producer, and her eyes widened just a bit. We've just been informed that President Trump will be joining us live via video from Washington. The audience gasped, shock, curiosity, disbelief all at once. A few clapped. Others groaned. Michelle straightened. Jasmine adjusted her mic, expression unreadable. Trump's face filled the massive LED screen, seated in the Oval Office. Good evening, he began, voice smooth with familiar confidence. Thought I'd join to offer some balance to this little discussion. A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Jasmine tilted her head, studying the screen like someone analyzing a chessboard. Michelle offered a polite smile. Well, Mr. President, she said calmly, we're glad you could join us. We were just talking about what real leadership looks like in times of division. Trump grinned. And that's why I'm here. People are tired of lectures from politicians pretending to be moral guides. We need strong voices, not emotional ones. The air thickened. Jasmine glanced at Michelle, then Rachel, then looked straight into the camera. Strong voices, yes. But strength without empathy isn't leadership. It's intimidation. The audience erupted, cheers, boos, everything in between. Rachel tried to regain control, but the moment had already struck fire. Trump cut in. Oh please, Congresswoman. You and your friends always talk about empathy, identity, feelings. What has that done for jobs? For safety? For the economy? Jasmine didn't flinch. Women-led initiatives have driven some of the fastest-growing small business recoveries in the country. And empathy isn't weakness, it's the foundation of trust. You cannot run a nation if you cannot listen to its people. Michelle nodded, letting Jasmine lead. The room quieted, sensing history in motion. Trump smirked. You sound rehearsed. That's what happens when you read too many talking points. Jasmine's eyes sharpened, not in anger, but accuracy. And you sound threatened. That's what happens when facts challenge feelings. A wave of applause crashed over the hall. Even Rachel couldn't hide a small smile. Michelle spoke next, steady and warm. The truth is, women don't need permission to lead. We've been doing it for generations, raising families, running communities, solving problems no one else wanted to touch. The only difference now is that people are finally watching. Trump tried to interject, but cheers drowned him out. For the first time, his face wavered. Jasmine leaned in. You say people are tired of lectures, Mr. President. But what they're really tired of is excuses. When leadership turns into self-promotion, the country loses faith. When it looks like service, people remember why democracy matters. Trump exhaled sharply. You're good with words, Congresswoman. But words don't win elections. Results do. Then let's talk results, she said. Under female-led programs across Texas and Georgia, homelessness dropped by double digits. Under bipartisan initiatives led by women in Congress, small business grants hit record highs. Those are results. You may not like who's achieving them, but America is noticing. The hall exploded into applause once again. Louder this time. And yet Jasmine's voice hadn't risen once. Her calmness spoke louder than his force. Michelle turned toward the screen, her voice soft, almost as if she were speaking to every woman watching from home. You know, she said, leadership isn't about domination. It's about service. It's about remembering that real power doesn't come from silencing others, but from lifting them up. The line hit the room like thunder. Even those who disagreed couldn't look away. Rachel tried steering the conversation back toward policy, but the energy had shifted. The moment had become bigger than politics, bigger than the stage. It was a mirror. A reminder. A reckoning. And somewhere in that crowded hall, you could feel something change, subtle, electric, irreversible. What came next would push the limits of civility, turning a routine televised conversation into a national moment no one would forget. The cameras tightened around Jasmine's face. She looked calm, but beneath it was a racing pulse. Every breath, every word mattered. The town hall wasn't just a discussion anymore. It was a live test of composure. On the screen, President Trump leaned back in his chair, the flag behind him perfectly framed. You talk a good game, Congresswoman, he said. But Americans want results, not lectures about feelings and history. All I hear from your side are excuses and victimhood. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some booed, some cheered. Rachel tried to interject, but Jasmine subtly raised her hand, not to silence, but to steady the moment. Mr. President, she said evenly, victimhood isn't what women are fighting for. We're fighting for recognition. For space. For fairness. You talk about results. Every result worth celebrating in this country came from someone brave enough to challenge what was considered normal. Trump smiled thinly. That's cute. But you're talking about ideals. People care about action. Jasmine didn't blink. Then maybe we should redefine action. Because listening, truly listening, is one of the hardest actions there is. It's what leadership requires, but rarely practices. The audience erupted again. Rachel glanced toward the control booth, signaling for a commercial break, but the producer shook his head. Ratings were soaring. Michelle watched the screen closely. Donald, she said, her tone controlled, this conversation isn't about sides. It's about responsibility. You have power. Jasmine has power. I have power. The real question is, how do we use it? Trump leaned in with a smirk. I use it to win, Michelle. That's the difference. You talk about empathy, I talk about success. Her smile didn't fade. One without the other doesn't last, she replied. History has shown that again and again. He chuckled. You think people remember empathy? They remember strength. They remember dominance. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the screen. And they remember who abused it. The line landed like a hammer. The crowd roared. Rachel's voice crackled over the speakers, urging order, but order was long gone. They had crossed into raw, unpredictable territory. Trump tried regaining control. You're all so dramatic, he said with a dismissive wave. You turn everything into gender and race. People just want results, not feelings about oppression. Jasmine's jaw tightened for a moment, but her tone stayed composed. With respect, sir, you can't fix what you refuse to see. If people are still begging for fairness, then the system you're defending isn't working as well as you think. Michelle placed a gentle hand on Jasmine's arm, not to stop her, but to share the weight of the moment. Trump shook his head. You sound angry, he said. Anger isn't the problem, Jasmine replied quickly. Silence is. The crowd rose to its feet. Clapping, shouting, phones everywhere. Thousands of clips already hitting social media in real time. Michelle's voice softened again. Donald, every time a woman speaks her truth, it's labeled as anger. But when a man interrupts, it's called leadership. That double standard has been around long enough, don't you think? He leaned back. That's your opinion. It's not an opinion, Jasmine said. It's lived reality. Ask the millions of women who carry this country every single day, at home, at work, in Congress. We're not asking for pity. We're asking for honesty. A woman in the crowd shouted, tell him. The hall exploded again. This is why we're here tonight, Michelle said, turning slightly toward the audience. Not to argue. But to remind America that leadership has a moral center. You can't tweet your way into respect. Trump narrowed his eyes. I have more respect than anyone in this room. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, steady and piercing. Respect isn't something you declare. It's something you earn. Silence. Even Trump didn't speak. The weight of her words settled across the room. Cameras cut to audience members, some wiping tears, others stunned. Finally, Trump broke the stillness. You're very good at talking, Congresswoman. Maybe that's all people expect from you, talk. Her expression didn't shift. Then listen carefully, she said. Because sometimes talk is the only weapon truth has left. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The tension felt almost electric, like something irreversible was unfolding right before everyone's eyes. Michelle leaned in, addressing the camera, not Trump, but the millions watching from home. We all want to make this country better. But we can't do it if leadership means tearing people down just to stand taller. That's not strength. That's fear wearing a suit. The audience erupted. Trump looked irritated now. He straightened his tie, forcing a smile. Maybe next time, he said, invite someone who actually understands the economy, instead of two people reading from emotion. Jasmine gave a small, measured laugh. Emotion built this country. Courage built it. Compassion saved it. And when the cameras stop rolling, that's what will keep it together. Rachel looked out over the crowd, realizing the broadcast had become something no producer could script. History was unfolding live, words turning into memory, debate turning into legacy, but Michelle wasn't finished. And what she said next silenced even the loudest in the room. The studio lights shimmered off the stage floor, reflecting faint silhouettes of the two women under the nation's gaze. Jasmine had spoken with precision and fire, but now the room gravitated toward Michelle Obama. Her presence carried something different, not louder, not harsher, but heavier. The crowd held its breath. On the screen, Trump smirked again, leaning forward with smug confidence. Go ahead, Michelle, he said. Tell us how feelings can fix the economy. The sarcasm crackled like static. Michelle tilted her head slightly, studying the screen as though analyzing a student trying too hard to appear sure of himself. This isn't about feelings, she began. It's about values. When leadership loses its moral compass, everything else follows. Trump chuckled through the feed. Moral compass? Please. I've done more for this country than any president before me. Look at the numbers. Michelle didn't flinch. Numbers don't tell the whole story, she said calmly. They never have. They don't measure compassion, they don't measure trust, and they certainly don't measure what people feel when they look at their leaders and see arrogance instead of service. Applause swept through the room. A few people rose, phones glowing in the air like lanterns. Trump waved a dismissive hand. You were never elected, Michelle. You were just lucky enough to marry someone who was. The line hit like a slap. But she didn't even blink. Her smile was quiet, unforced, the kind that said I've heard worse than you. You're right, she said, still steady. I wasn't elected. But I spent 8 years watching what leadership looks like when it's about people, not ego. I saw what happens when someone walks into a room and listens instead of talks. You might call that weakness. I call it wisdom. Cheers surged through the hall again. Jasmine looked at Michelle with genuine admiration. Even in the tension, there was respect, two women sharing the weight of a national spotlight that could turn hostile in an instant. Trump leaned toward the camera. You know what, Michelle? People don't want lectures about morality. They want results. You're talking about feelings because you can't talk about winning. Michelle exhaled, her voice dipping into a lower, steadier register. Winning, she repeated. You think leadership is about winning? Leadership isn't a game, Mr. President. When you treat it like one, you start treating people like opponents instead of citizens. Her words echoed across the hall. This time, the audience didn't clap. They didn't move. Only the soft clicking of cameras broke the silence. Jasmine stepped in, her tone controlled. The truth is, real leadership means doing the right thing even when it's unpopular. History remembers those moments more than any slogan. Trump smirked. History remembers who's strong. Michelle's eyes locked onto the lens as if she were speaking straight into America's living rooms. And it also remembers who was cruel. The silence afterward was heavy, suffocating. Even the moderators hesitated. Rachel finally cleared her throat. Let's keep this focused on the topic of leadership, she said, though her voice wavered. Trump nodded. Fine. I'll tell you what leadership is. It's doing what others are too afraid to do. It's standing firm, even if people hate you for it. Standing firm, Michelle replied, isn't the same as refusing to listen. When you lead by fear, you get obedience. When you lead by respect, you get loyalty. That's the difference. The crowd erupted again. Someone shouted, say it louder. Laughter rippled across the audience, momentarily breaking the tension. Trump's jaw tightened. You're good at speeches, Michelle. Always have been. But speeches don't run nations. She leaned back slightly, her voice as calm as ever. Neither do tantrums. The line landed hard. Even Jasmine had to hide a small smile. In the control booth, chaos broke out, producers waving their arms, unsure whether to cut the feed or let history unfold. But everyone knew what this moment had become, a cultural flashpoint. Michelle continued, her voice gentler now as she looked toward Jasmine. When I think about leadership, I think about the women who wake before dawn, work 2 jobs, and still show up for their kids' school meetings. I think about teachers who buy supplies with their own money. I think about nurses who hold a stranger's hand after a 12-hour shift. That's leadership. Jasmine nodded, visibly moved. And none of those people need to step on anyone to do it. Trump cut in. You're describing ordinary people. I'm talking about power. Michelle turned her gaze back to him. Exactly. Power without purpose is just noise. The crowd rose again, louder than before. Applause thundered across the stage so fiercely that Rachel's mic nearly caught feedback. Michelle waited for the noise to settle, then said quietly, "The problem, Mr. President, is that too many people think leadership is about control. It's not. It's about responsibility, the kind that doesn't disappear when the cameras turn off." The lights shimmered across her face as she spoke. The entire room seemed suspended on her words. Even Trump, for a brief moment, looked unsure whether to fire back or simply sit still. Jasmine leaned in, her voice soft. "Michelle, I think that's what people needed to hear." Michelle offered a small smile. "Sometimes truth doesn't need volume. It just needs space." The audience erupted again, not wild cheers, but a standing ovation that carried an unusual unity. Supporters, skeptics, journalists, everyone understood something larger than politics was unfolding. Trump sat silently before forcing a chuckle. "You two should start a talk show." Jasmine answered without missing a beat. "No, Mr. President. We already have one, and it's called America." The crowd exploded once more. But the night wasn't finished. The next exchange would turn a heated debate into a defining moment, one even Trump wouldn't see coming. When the broadcast returned from a brief break, the atmosphere inside the Atlanta Civic Center had transformed. What began as a conversation now felt like two worlds colliding, the world clinging to old power and the one daring to redefine it. The audience buzzed, phones raised high, knowing they were witnessing something that would outlast the broadcast. Rachel Mitchell tried to regain control. "All right, everyone, let's bring it back. This conversation has clearly struck a chord. Let's talk about what leadership looks like in practice, not theory." Trump cut her off before she could finish. "I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like putting America first, standing up to weak politicians, and refusing to apologize for success. I built an economy that worked. I put people back to work. That's leadership." A few clapped, but they were quickly drowned out by boos. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on her knees, her voice precise and grounded. "That's one version. But leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the voice that speaks for the people who aren't being heard." Trump laughed. "You love slogans, don't you?" Jasmine didn't smile. "No. I love accountability." A low ripple of approval moved through the crowd. Michelle rested her hands on the table, posture straight. "Donald," she began gently, "you keep talking about success. But success without empathy is hollow. You measure leadership by profit margins. We measure it by people's lives." Trump scoffed. "You think I don't care about people? I've done more for this country than anyone in that room." Michelle's response was quiet but firm. "Then why do so many people feel unseen?" The room fell silent again. Trump blinked, not expecting the question. Rachel attempted to intervene. "Let's stay focused on leadership values," she said softly, but Trump wasn't finished. "People feel unseen because the media lies to them," he said, voice rising. "Because politicians like you sell division while pretending to care." Jasmine's voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "Division doesn't start with people asking to be treated equally. It starts with those who refuse to see equality as a shared goal." Steady applause rose, not frantic, but deliberate, like understanding settling into the room. Trump shook his head. "You've got all the talking points ready. You probably practiced this." Jasmine met his gaze on screen. "You don't need practice to speak truth, Mr. President. You just need courage." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Even through the screen, it landed like a direct challenge. Trump exhaled sharply, defensive now. "You think you're better than me because you talk nice on TV? You and Michelle love your fancy words, but I actually get things done." Michelle leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but steely. "No one is questioning your ability to act. We're questioning why your actions leave people behind." Another wave of applause rolled through the hall. Even some of Trump's supporters couldn't deny the precision of her words. Jasmine added softly, "Power isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people trust you." Trump shot back. "Fear keeps people in line." Michelle shook her head slowly. "No, Donald. Fear breaks nations." The line hung in the air, so still that even the camera operators hesitated before moving. Rachel tried again. But Trump cut her off, raising his voice. "You're all acting like saints. You talk about unity, but you spend your careers blaming others. That's not leadership. That's hypocrisy." Jasmine didn't hesitate. "You call it hypocrisy when people demand justice. But justice doesn't happen quietly. You can't fix a wound by pretending it's not bleeding." Gasps filled the audience. The weight of her words hit everyone at once. Trump crossed his arms. "You really think you can fix everything with speeches?" Michelle gave a faint smile. "No. But speeches built movements. Movements built nations. That's how change has always started, not from anger, but from clarity." A hush fell over the hall again. The screen showed Trump shifting uncomfortably, trying to find his footing. Jasmine broke the silence. "You said earlier that leadership is about standing firm even when people hate you. But there's a difference between being bold and being cruel, and America's learning to tell the difference." Trump exhaled loudly, leaning forward. "You two talk a lot about compassion. But compassion doesn't build borders, fix trade deals, or stop wars." Michelle replied, calm and direct, "No, it doesn't. But compassion prevents the kind of wars that start in people's hearts long before they ever reach the battlefield." For a long moment, neither side spoke. Even through the cameras, the tension felt like it had reached its peak. Jasmine finally turned toward Michelle. "You know what I think the problem is?" Michelle looked at her. "What?" "Some people think leadership is about control. But control is fragile. It shatters when people stop being afraid." The audience rose, clapping thunderously, voices mixing in waves of agreement. Trump frowned, visibly irritated. "You can have the applause. I'll keep the presidency." Michelle looked directly into the lens, "Then use it to serve. Because the world is watching what kind of power you believe in." The applause swelled into cheers. Even Rachel seemed overwhelmed by the emotion flooding the room. In that moment, it was clear this wasn't just a clash of political ideals, it was a moral confrontation broadcast to millions, but the real turning point wasn't the debate itself. It was what Jasmine would say next, a statement so raw and direct it would change the tone of the entire night. The applause hadn't even died down when Rachel leaned toward her mic, trying to regain control. "All right," she said with a strained smile, "let's bring it back to our main topic, leadership in times of division." But no one was looking at her anymore. Every camera, every lens, every pair of eyes was fixed on Jasmine Crockett. She had gone silent, sitting perfectly still, her expression thoughtful. Michelle glanced at her, sensing something was coming, that slow inhale before a storm breaks. Then Jasmine leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Mr. President, you said leadership is about winning. Let's talk about that." Trump shifted in his chair, half grinning. "Go ahead. I like a good lecture." Jasmine didn't bite. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, she wasn't trying to win. When Shirley Chisholm ran for president, she wasn't trying to win. They were trying to change something, to make people see what was wrong. They didn't measure victory in polls or ratings. They measured it in courage. The crowd went silent. Not a murmur. Not even a phone beep. Just the kind of awe that fills a room when truth hits like thunder. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but Jasmine continued, "You've made people believe leadership is about dominance, about being louder, meaner, more stubborn. But when the lights go off and the crowd goes home, dominance means nothing if people don't trust you." Journalists typed furiously, already quoting her line word for word. Trump tried to brush it off. "You love your speeches. But speeches don't build businesses or pay bills." Jasmine's eyes stayed locked on the camera. "Neither does disrespect. Neither does arrogance. You can build all the towers you want, but if they're built on contempt, they'll crumble. Every empire that forgot its people fell, not because of weakness, but because of pride. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by another heavy wave of applause. Michelle turned toward Jasmine, her face glowing with quiet approval. "That's what this is about," she said softly. Then she faced the screen. "Donald, people want to believe again, not in politicians, but in decency." Trump's jaw tightened. Decency doesn't protect borders. It doesn't stop inflation. It doesn't make deals. Michelle's voice dropped lower, but it keeps nations from breaking apart. And right now, that's worth more than any deal you've ever signed. For the first time, Trump didn't respond immediately. The camera zoomed in, catching a fleeting flicker of hesitation in his expression. Rachel cleared her throat. "Congresswoman Crockett, Mrs. Obama. I think the country is hearing something tonight that it hasn't heard in a while." Michelle nodded. "Honesty without hate." The applause rose again, echoing through the hall like a drumbeat. Trump, growing impatient, tried to interrupt. "You know, Michelle, people love your speeches. But the world doesn't run on hope. It runs on strength." She replied, "Hope is strength. The difference is, it builds instead of breaks." Jasmine turned to Rachel. "Can I say one more thing?" Rachel gestured for her to continue. Jasmine faced the camera, her voice steady. "When I was a public defender, I met women who worked 3 jobs, raised their kids alone, and still found time to volunteer at their churches. They never made the news. They never got thanked. But they held their communities together. That's leadership too. It's not loud. It's not glamorous. But it's real." The audience stood, clapping in rhythm. Some had tears in their eyes. The camera panned to women holding their phones up, whispering, "She said what we've been feeling." Trump tried to regain control. "That's a nice story, but running a country isn't the same as running a household." Jasmine answered instantly, "That's where you're wrong. Because the people who run households are the ones who understand sacrifice. They know what it means to make decisions that hurt today but help tomorrow. That's leadership in its purest form. And maybe if Washington learned that, we'd all be better off." Cheers thundered through the building. Michelle leaned closer to her mic. "The truth is, this country doesn't need a savior. It needs servants, people willing to lead without needing to be worshipped." That line echoed through the speakers, crisp and final. Trump laughed, but the sound lacked its usual confidence. "You two sound rehearsed." Michelle smiled faintly. "Experience isn't rehearsal." The crowd roared again. Rachel struggled to regain control. "All right. I think we can agree this conversation has gone further than any of us expected tonight." Jasmine added, "That's what happens when truth shows up." Trump rolled his eyes. "You've got a lot of opinions, Congresswoman. We'll see how far that gets you." She shot back gently. "It got me here, across from you, live on national television, speaking for millions of people who've waited too long to be heard." Another rumble of cheers flooded the hall. Trump smirked and leaned closer to the camera. "You really think you won this?" Jasmine looked at Michelle, then back at him. "There's nothing to win. Only something to remember." The audience knew she was right. For a moment, even Trump had no words. The feed from Washington froze briefly, as if the air itself had paused. Rachel's voice returned softly through the speakers. "We're going to take a short break, stay with us." The cameras cut to black, but the energy in the room didn't fade. Michelle leaned toward Jasmine and whispered, just loud enough for the microphones to catch, "You just changed the conversation." Jasmine smiled slightly, eyes still fixed on the dark screen. "Let's hope they were listening." But when the show returned, the nation itself would become part of the story. And what happened next would reach far beyond that stage in Atlanta. By the time the broadcast ended, the air in the Civic Center felt thick with adrenaline. Reporters were already out of their seats, racing to the lobby to file their stories. The audience buzzed with a mix of disbelief and excitement. Everyone knew they'd witnessed something historic, though no one yet understood how far it would ripple. Outside, the Atlanta night pulsed with noise. News vans lined the street. Anchors stood under harsh lights, rehearsing their opening lines. A fiery exchange tonight between President Trump, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and former First Lady Michelle Obama. The words echoed across networks like a drumbeat, traveling coast to coast. Back inside, Jasmine sat quietly backstage, still wearing her blazer, her microphone clipped to her collar. A stagehand offered her water, but she barely noticed. She stared at the floor, her mind replaying the confrontation in loops. Every pause, every word, every glance. Michelle walked over, unhurried, as if she'd done this 1,000 times. She handed Jasmine the water bottle and said softly, "You did good." Jasmine exhaled, finally taking a sip. "I don't know." It felt like shouting into a storm. Michelle smiled gently. "That's what storms are for, clearing the air." A staffer poked his head into the dressing room. "Ma'am, your clip is already trending #1 on Twitter." Jasmine blinked. "Already?" Michelle chuckled. "You didn't just speak to a crowd, Jasmine. You spoke to a generation that's been waiting for someone to say it." Jasmine's phone began buzzing non-stop, mentions, calls, requests, interviews. On the TV mounted in the corner, CNN replayed her quote, "Power isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people trust you." The caption below it read, "Moment of the year." Jasmine shook her head. "I didn't plan that. It just came out." "That's why it worked," Michelle said. "The truth never sounds rehearsed." Meanwhile in Washington, Trump's aides scrambled to spin the moment. Within minutes, a White House spokesperson appeared on Fox News defending him. The president was simply emphasizing strong leadership, they insisted. Others prefer emotional talking points. But the clips told a different story. Every network replayed the confrontation in slow motion. Jasmine's steady stare, Michelle's composed restraint, Trump's tightening jaw. Then the internet exploded. Memes. Hashtags. Edits. Hashtag Crockett and Michelle. Hashtag Women for Truth. Hashtag Leadership over Ego. By morning, those hashtags had crossed tens of millions of impressions. Michelle watched the coverage from her hotel suite, still in a robe, sipping coffee. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from senators, journalists, old friends, even celebrities. She stayed calm. She'd weathered storms before. Then another message popped up, this one from Barack, "You two did good." Reminded people what leadership looks like. She smiled quietly and set the phone aside. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Jasmine was back in her apartment. She hadn't slept. Her phone had become a battlefield, hundreds of messages filled with support, and just as many filled with anger or threats. She was used to criticism, but this felt different. She turned on the TV. Every channel showed her face. Panelists debated whether she had disrespected the president or simply spoken truth to power. A young MSNBC producer called, voice shaking with excitement, "Congresswoman, would you join our morning show tomorrow? Everyone's talking about you." Jasmine sighed softly. "Let's focus on the message, not the noise. If I come on, I'm not there for ratings. I'm there to talk about why people feel unseen." The producer hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely." After hanging up, Jasmine sat by her window as the morning light spilled across the Dallas skyline. For the first time since the debate, she let herself breathe. Her assistant, Deja, stepped in carrying a stack of letters. "You've got notes from teachers, nurses, single moms, all saying you made them proud last night." She said one woman wrote that she watched with her daughter and cried. Jasmine lowered her eyes to the letter, her throat tightening. "That's what matters," she whispered. "That's exactly what matters." Back in Atlanta, Michelle was preparing to fly out when a journalist caught her in the hallway. "Mrs. Obama," he asked, "what do you think last night meant for the country?" She paused before answering. "It meant we're still listening," she said. "We just needed someone to remind us how." By noon, headlines were everywhere. Women redefine leadership. Live on air. Crockett and Obama confront power. Even conservative outlets couldn't deny something had shifted. Trump posted on his Truth Social account, fake news media trying to twist last night's event. Weak women pushing emotional nonsense. Sad. But the post backfired. Replies flooded in defending Jasmine and Michelle, calling out the double standard. Cable news played side-by-side clips, Trump interrupting, Jasmine staying composed, Michelle's words cutting through the noise. Power without purpose is just noise. A segment on ABC's Good Morning America called it, "The Night Women Changed the Conversation." At her office, Jasmine watched quietly as the clip replayed. Her chief of staff, Daniel, turned to her. "You know this isn't just going to fade away, right?" She smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe it'll start something that doesn't." Michelle, boarding her plane back to Chicago, looked out the window at the city below. She thought about everything that had been said, the noise, the tension, the weight of truth that somehow still rose above it. A flight attendant approached. "Would you like anything before takeoff, Mrs. Obama?" Michelle shook her head. "No, thank you," she said softly, eyes drifting back toward the clouds. "I just hope people were listening, not to us, but to themselves." As the nation woke up to a storm of headlines and heated debates, the question wasn't what had happened, it was what would happen next. Moments like this don't fade, they redirect. They shift the ground beneath politics itself. The next morning, America felt different. The chatter wasn't about ratings or poll numbers, it was about words, and what they meant. Across breakfast tables, classrooms, and offices, people replayed the clips, quoting lines like they were scripture. Power isn't about fear. Leadership is about service. Something about the way Jasmine and Michelle spoke had cut through the usual noise. It didn't sound like politics. It sounded like clarity. Cable news ran endless montages. Commentators analyzed tone, timing, facial expressions. Yet no one could quite explain why it resonated so deeply. Maybe it was exhaustion, tired of outrage, tired of division, tired of feeling like every truth came with an agenda. For the first time in a long time, they watched two women stand on national television, hold their composure, and tell the most powerful man in the world that strength isn't measured by volume. In Atlanta, the Civic Center sat quiet again, banners down, stage empty, but the echoes lingering in the national conversation. Rachel Mitchell returned to the same stage 2 days later for another segment. She looked into the camera and said, "We planned for a town hall. We witnessed a turning point." Meanwhile, in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett walked into her congressional office to find the hallway lined with flowers, letters, and cards from across the country. One bouquet carried a note from a teacher in Milwaukee. "For the first time, my students stayed after class to talk about leadership. You made them believe it still exists." Jasmine sat at her desk, turning the note in her hands. Deja walked in with a grin. "You're scheduled for interviews all week. Everyone wants to talk about last night." Jasmine sighed. "I'll do a few. But not to talk about me. I want to talk about what comes next." Deja nodded. "People are ready for that conversation." Across the country in Chicago, Michelle stood before a crowd of high school girls at a mentorship summit she'd planned months earlier. The event had sold out within hours after the broadcast. Cameras flashed, students cheered, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the same calm gravity it held on that stage in Atlanta. "You've seen what happens when you speak your truth," she said. "But truth alone isn't enough. You have to live it, breathe it, protect it. Because there will always be people who try to shout it down. And you don't win by shouting back. You win by staying steady." Students clapped, some wiping tears. Michelle smiled gently. "What you saw this week wasn't about politics. It was about remembering that empathy and power can share the same space. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Later that day, an NBC anchor played the clip on the evening news and said, "In a time of cynicism, two women reminded the country that conviction still matters." In Washington, Trump's team tried to move past the incident, but every time he dismissed it, the contrast became sharper, reaction versus reflection. The divide was visible, but so was the hunger for something better. By Friday, public opinion polls revealed a surprising shift, growing trust in women in government. Analysts called it the Crockett effect. Hashtags like #ServiceNotShow and #IntegrityWins continued trending, Jasmine appeared on MSNBC that weekend. The interviewer asked, "Congresswoman, what do you think that night really represented?" The interviewer asked. Jasmine looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "It represented something we forgot, that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it stands still. Sometimes it simply refuses to lie." The interviewer nodded. "Do you think this moment changed the political landscape?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "Moments don't change politics. People do. But maybe this one reminded us that words can still mean something." Back in Chicago, Michelle sat at her kitchen table watching a replay of Jasmine's interview. Barack walked by, newspaper in hand. "She handled that well," he said. Michelle chuckled. "She did. And she'll need that calm. The spotlight's a heavy place to live." He set the paper down and looked at her. "So, what's next?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe now people will start demanding better. Not perfect, just better." The country kept talking. College classrooms discussed integrity and leadership. Churches wove the moment into sermons. Even late-night hosts, usually quick with jokes, ended their monologues with rare sincerity. One viral tweet summed it up best: "Last night wasn't politics." It was a reminder that decency doesn't need a party. Weeks later, the moment still lingered, not because of outrage, but because of reflection. In towns across America, people began asking themselves different questions. What kind of leader do I follow? What kind of person am I becoming? Jasmine returned to Capitol Hill with newly earned visibility, and a quiet burden. She knew fame wasn't the goal. Purpose was. Walking through the corridors, she passed portraits of those who came before her and whispered under her breath, "Let's make this count." That night, Michelle wrote on her social media page, "True leadership doesn't come from power. It comes from courage, the courage to listen, to care, and to rise above pride." Within an hour, it was shared over 500,000 times. America had seen many political moments before, but this one felt different. Not because it was about policy or position, but because it was about tone. About truth. About remembering that civility paired with courage could still move people. And somewhere between Dallas and Chicago, two women, one in her office, one in her home, sat quietly in the afterglow of a night that would end up in history books. They hadn't planned to make headlines. They had simply refused to be silent. The lesson was unmistakable: strength isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who speaks the truth, even when the world isn't ready to hear it. So as the screen fades and the headlines shift, remember this: every time you choose honesty over ego, empathy over anger, and courage over comfort, you are shaping the kind of world they fought for that night. And if this story moved you, don't just watch, carry it forward. Speak up when silence feels safer. Stand firm when kindness feels weak. Because the next turning point might not happen on live TV, it might start with you. And if you believe integrity still matters, subscribe for more stories that remind us who we are, and who we can still become.